Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Kimberly Tucker, and I am the Director of Marketing here at DSD, and I have the privilege of being your event host today, which means you will hear my voice, but not see me. So instead, you will meet our presenters today. We have our Business Development Manager, the Sage Intacct practice, Sean, and our Director of Sage Consulting over both sides of the house, 100 and Intacct, Eric, as well as our Senior Sage Intacct Consultant, Andres. So they will be in charge of expressing our expertise on this topic of bringing our Sage 100 clients all the knowledge that comforts and allows them to have a successful migration to Intacct when they are ready. So the Lunch and Learn agenda is basically the overview of DSD as a whole. We are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, super excited. And we have been a Sage partner for that entire time. So we really have depth and breadth on the Sage product lines, and that's really what we hope to display here as well. So in addition to that, we have been cloud adopted for over a decade. So really want to emphasize how the cloud has changed and why that matters to your business. And then get into Intacct as a product, and then compare that product to the one that you own, which is Sage 100. So we obviously have decades of Sage 100 experience, and we're rounding out about 8 years as an Intacct partner. So really love this comparison. This is something we have authority on based on our history, and we're just leading in the channel that as the top partner for this message. So really excited to have you here and share a couple of success stories that we have celebrated over the last couple of years. And then to round out the session, we will have Q&A. So please feel free to use the team here. They obviously have tons of knowledge to share, and we can't squeeze it all into an hour with you. So we will absolutely give you the driving seat on whatever you want to ask us. In addition to that, the Q&A or the questions area of the webinar will be helpful to you, or any of you that had any trouble redeeming your vouchers or can't find anything, basically. Feel free to use the questions box throughout, or feel free to respond to any of the emails that you've been sent over the course of the last couple of weeks. My team will respond hopefully quickly and get you sorted out so that you have everything you need to enjoy the Lunch and Learn today. And with that, we will move to Sean.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I appreciate that. So we wanted to start off just talking a little bit about who DSD Business Systems is and why you should listen to us when we're talking about the comparison between Sage 100 and Intacct. Like Kimberly alluded to, we have almost 40 years. We're actually celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. And throughout the course of those 40 years, we have over 9,500 businesses served, over 5,500 custom implementations, and that's performed by our over 50 offices throughout the United States and Canada. We always refer to this slide as our kind of the trophy room, because we're really proud of the things that we've been able to achieve, both with Sage 100 and with Intacct. And when we made that transition over to Intacct, we're really excited about the functionality that it allowed us to bring to you, our partners that we work with throughout the various Sage products. And so we wanted to take a minute to talk about why the digital transformation is so crucial for so many organizations. As I'm sure you guys have heard, there's an exponential growth of data demands, advanced analysis, and storage solutions that are out there. Another thing that's been a lot more common over the last couple of years, especially with COVID, is that a lot more companies have remote workers, and that requires a more robust digital collaboration tool set across your entire organization. It's also really important for cost efficiency. We all know that every dollar counts right now, especially during an economic downturn, which is subject to happen at any given point in time. And it's vital to stay competitive. And so you really need to make sure that you're maximizing the money that you're spending on your software and your tool set in order to take advantage of that. Another thing that we always want to pay attention to is that there's constantly changing regulations. Because of those regulations, things such as HIPAA, FASB, different types of compliance that's required for your organization, you really need to make sure that you're staying agile, both with your compliance and your reporting systems. And another thing that was top of mind for us all the time as people that work with software and computing solutions is that security is key now more than ever. There's constantly different cyber threats that are out there in the environment, They're finding new ways to take advantage of organizations all the time, and you really need to make sure that you have a tool set that enables you to be as secure as possible. And we also want to talk about why the cloud matters. There's a lot of considerations that you need to take, that you need to factor in when you're going through and measuring the benefits of on-premise versus cloud. With on-premise, a lot of what you're experiencing, the costs are below the surface level. As you can see this little iceberg graphic, you only really have to take into account, the software licenses. That's really only 9% of your overall budget. But then there's a whole lot of other things that are below the surface that you may not be taking into consideration, such as applying fixes, patches, and upgrades, system downtime, tuning up the performance of your system, having to rewrite customizations or integrations anytime you do any type of patch, fix, or upgrade. You may have to upgrade dependent applications, and that creates an ongoing burden to your IT department. They also have to maintain and upgrade hardware, maintain and upgrade your network, maintain and upgrade your security, as well as your database. And a lot of these things go away when you're talking about the cloud. Through the cost of the cloud, you'll notice that more of it's above the line, and you really don't have to worry near as much about some of these other things that are ongoing because all of that is handled by your cloud provider. There's an annual subscription fee. There may be some annual support fees taken into consideration in consulting, and that's really only when you need to change something or try to get more out of your system. So we've talked about a couple of other things. We've talked about why the cloud matters. It's time to talk about Sage Intacct and what it is. Sage Intacct is a cloud financial management solution that's really designed for finance teams. It's dashboard driven. It's real time with drill down capabilities that allow you to get all the way down to the transaction level. There are integrations that are not going to break with upgrades. So anytime you have to upgrade Sage Intacct, and we'll talk about what those upgrades look like a little bit more in greater detail. But that means that you're guaranteed that those integrations aren't going to break anytime the system upgrades. And those upgrades come out once a quarter. Those are automatic and free. Intacct is the AICPA endorsed #1 solution for customer satisfaction, as evidenced by all these little awards down at the bottom of the screen. It's got an ongoing customer community that really allows you to exchange ideas with other Intacct users around the globe and talk about things that can be done to improve the product or things that other people might be doing that you haven't tried yet that can really help you maximize the product. It is a best-in-class scalable application that you can access from anywhere on any device, be that a tablet, laptop. You can even access it on your phone if you need to. It's true dimensional accounting, and Andres will talk a little bit more about what that means and why that's so important and really what that can open up for you. It is a multi-company, multi-entity, multi-currency, multi-tenant. And one of the really nice things about that, as Eric will get to in a little bit, is that it means that everything that you have is contained within one environment. And we'll talk about what the power of that solution and how that can help you guys in a second. So you may be sitting here wondering, well, hey, that all sounds great, but does this apply to me? There's a lot of industries that Intacct really fits well with, and it's by no means limited to this list, but we've had a lot of success with organizations that have moved from Sage 100 to Intacct in the hospitality space, in healthcare, nonprofit, financial services, and franchises. But just because you're not on this list doesn't mean that Intacct can't work for you. So I would absolutely encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions around it to see if we might be able to make it fit for you. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Eric and Andres, and they're going to take you through a live demo of Sage Intacct.
Thanks, John. While we get this slide moved over to Andres, I'll just, this is Eric Anderson, and like Kimberly mentioned, I manage our Sage 100 and Sage Intacct consulting departments. I did want to point out, just maybe set the table a little bit about Sage 100 and Sage Intacct. So DSD was just recognized by Sage Software for being the leading Sage 100 to Sage Intacct migration partner. And before we get into some of the gaps that we commonly see with Sage 100, let me just preface this by saying I've been working with Sage 100, formerly Mass 9200, since 2001. It's a great application. We have a robust, very experienced group of Sage 100 consultants, and we love supporting our Sage 100 clients. Sage 100 was initially released by a company called State of the Art way back in 1988. And so when we refer to it as a legacy application, that's because it was developed as an on-prem application, and it's getting closer and closer to its 40-year birthday. And just to kind of give you something to compare it to, Great Plains, which I'm guessing most of you have heard of Great Plains or come across it in your careers, became Microsoft Great Plains and then Dynamics GP. That came out in 1981, and Microsoft is currently planning to completely discontinue all new sales of Dynamics GP licenses by 2026. So there's a lot of GP Great Plains users scrambling to find something new. To be clear, Sage has not announced any plans to sunset Sage 100. They continue to fully support it. We could fully support it, and they're still adding functionality to it. But just trying to give you a little bit of perspective and a bit of a history lesson to help you understand why we keep talking about Sage Intacct. And so we'll start this presentation discussing native cloud and security. Sage 100 is not a native cloud application. As we just discussed, it was built as an on-prem application. Let's assume that you have a local server with Sage 100 installed at your organization. In that case, you are responsible to make sure that you have backups of your data. You want to make sure those backups are in good shape and that you test restoring from those backups. Every once in a while, we have a client that says, I have the backup, but I can't restore from it. So if you're not able to restore from a backup, it's kind of useless. So make sure you test that process. You'll need to make sure that security patches are being installed on that server and that the server meets the system requirements of Sage 100. And then when you upgrade, you've got to review those system requirements. You might have to update your server. There are workstation installations for you to manage. Sage 100, the client can only be installed on a PC, not on a Mac. You're likely much more susceptible to ransomware if you're managing your own server. We have at least 2 to 3 clients every year that pay tens of thousands of dollars to get, and we had one that actually paid over $100,000 to get their Sage 100 data unencrypted after a ransomware attack. So those are the kind of horror stories we don't like to see. We're always here to help, but it's a lot of work. And this last point is going to sound a little bit ridiculous, but you might be susceptible to someone walking into your office, going into an unlocked closet or server room and walking off with your server. That's a true story. One of my clients had that happen to them. As crazy as it sounds, they did not have backups. They had to rebuild financials from printed copies of reports. Now, like any other application, Sage 100 can be installed on a virtual machine in a hosted cloud environment. And we've actually done quite a bit of that at DSD with Sage Partner Cloud. It works well. We're able to handle the backups and server patching, but there's still some major differences between Sage 100 and a true native cloud application like Sage Intacct. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andres and he can kind of show you what we're talking about.
Thank you, Eric. And so Sage Intacct, like Eric mentioned, is a native cloud solution. So we're going to start from just opening up a browser and logging in. My personal preference is Chrome. It doesn't mean that you only have to use Chrome. It's supported through multiple different browsers. So whether that be Safari on a Mac, whether you like Edge, or if there's Firefox or anything else. And so, for example, if we start just by searching Sage Intacct login, right, we'll get to our URL. Everybody's going to have a unique company ID. It's going to have your user ID. So the only folks who can access the system are active users. And then there's an entire password policy around it. And so if I log in here, if I have, it does support single sign-on. If I had an incorrect password, there's rules that we can specify for the user in terms of how many times can they try to log in with an incorrect password before they get locked out, and they need an admin, right? Somebody else on the team who can send a password reset or anything like that. And so I'm actually going to slide into my demo environment, and we'll take a look at the home screen. And so you can see here, it just opens up another tab within the product. If I'm working on multiple different windows, it's as easy as just right clicking on the tab, duplicating. I can reload, I can close a tab, I can keep moving on. But then just looking from the home screen, so this is just the default. So we have a full help and support within the application. So if you wanted to look at the help center, it's a very quick link to go in. if you needed to search, an article on, for example, importing bills, it's as easy as just typing that into the search bar, finding the article. Intacct does a really good job in terms of breaking these out so that you have, specific information in terms of, what subscription do we need to have to get into, importing bills and this functionality, explanations about where to download a template, if we need to import anything, how to prepare that for an import, anything that helps call out in terms of, for live bill versus historical, and even images that can help, when troubleshooting any common errors. But then if we go back, so then Intacct also has Sage University. And so with Sage University, there's on-demand training, right? And so any Sage Intacct customer can get into the Sage University. And for example, I'm going to call out the fundamentals training. So the fundamentals training, what it does is it gives you a full training environment, right? Where you have a list of activities and it's self-paced. So you don't have to sit there and watch a video. You can actually go through the motions, following the activities and doing everything that it's asking you to do. You can see the intended results, whether it be creating a bill, creating a payment, running a report, things like that. There are videos for those folks who kind of learn better that way and want to see a quick video, whether it be on running 1099s, whether it be working with budgets and things like that. But that's all managed within the Sage University that you can then access through Sage Intacct. There's also a full community. And so within the community, you can actually go in. So I'll go through these couple hyperlinks. You can actually log in to the community and you can post ideas, you can post questions to the community, you can interact with other users in the system. There's ideas that are also posted here. So if I wanted to kind of reach out to anybody and, I had a question, what's the best way for me to run a report on fixed assets? What's the best way for me to handle these eliminating entries? I can ask the community, and then other customers or partners or Intacct themselves can, help respond, and we can work collaboratively, so I can make sure I'm getting the most out of my system. On top of that, there's other links here. So for example, whether it be looking at just additional information, so Intacct puts links here for like thriving in a changing world. That'll come out. It gives you some videos, some additional information that you can help grab, but you don't have to kind of search for that. It's all at your fingertips. And then there's links for just about everything else. So whether it be navigating to applications, so you have a full application dropdown that you can go through. But if this looks, a little bit too much, you can go through the links here at the right. So if we wanted to say, for example, I wanted to click on accounts payable, right? And then I wanted to look at my vendor list. I can go through the motions. I can click that. I can look at my vendor list. I can also bookmark this, right? So there's bookmarks in the system. So if I want to bookmark this page, right, I can call it, my vendor master list. I can save that bookmark so that if I go back, for example, to my home screen, I can then navigate back to the bookmarks. I can say, you know what, I want to look at my vendor list. I can get to it fairly easily, and I don't have to remember the same navigation every single time. On top of the bookmarks, you also have the ability to favorite certain menus. So for example, I favorited bills. All you would have to do is look at this little star icon to the left, and you can get into the bills list just from clicking that. Or if I wanted to say, for example, if I wanted to look at my vendor aging report, I can favorite different menus that I have access to and kind of keep all that together.
Okay, thanks, Andres. Let's talk a little bit about multi-entity and multi-currency. So in Sage 100, you're all familiar with this. If you have more than one company or even a test company, you have to go to the top left, change the company that you are in to transition into another company. Nothing is shared behind the scenes. You're looking at separate tables and separate databases. On the back end where your files are stored, if you have 10 companies in Sage 100, you have 10 different company folders storing that specific company data. So an intercompany entry in Sage 100 doesn't really exist unless you manually post the entry in, let's say, company ABC, hit an intercompany account, then you switch out of that, you go to XYZ, create another journal entry, and hit the intercompany account there and post it. If you wanted to add a new vendor across 10 different company codes, you would manually add that vendor in each of those 10 companies. Now, footnote, DSD does have a lot of enhancements for Sage 100, and we try to fill some of these common gaps with multi-entity and multi-currency add-ons. But when we're talking about the Sage 100 product out of the box, there is no multi-company, no multi-currency, and that's a big differentiator with Sage Intacct. And Andres can give you a quick look at that and show you how it works.
Thanks. Yep. And so if we navigate back to Sage Intacct, so when we're talking about multi-entity management, so if we look, for example, that's all managed within the company menu, we can track multiple different entities. They can have different base currencies. So this would be your reporting currency. So I can have, for example, in this case, I have 2 USA entities. I have a Canadian entity. I have an entity in the UK. So that reports in pound sterling. I can track all that and maintain it within the system. That can be accessed, in intact terms from this top level, so from the highest umbrella, or if I wanted to kind of slide down into the individual entity, so this would be sliding into the individual company so that I only transact, for example, in entity 100, right? I can open that up, it'll open up another tab, and I can just start transacting, I can start doing whatever I need. If we go to the bills entry screen, we can see, from the top level, you have that same shared vendor master list, like Eric mentioned, and you can see, so in this case, I'll have one Massachusetts Department of Revenue vendor, right? I don't need to create multiples. If I did have, a restriction that I wanted to place on the vendor, there is the way in Intacct to say, this vendor, I'm going to restrict, I'm going to label it as a restricted vendor, and I can say, I only want to transact with that vendor in entity 100. Right? But then that becomes something that you control and that you're not forced into. And it's something that you can update over time. But then if we go a little bit further, so then we can see in our location dropdown, so this is where we have the multiple different entities, so the 100, the 200, and any locations that roll up into any of those particular entities. Intacct also natively supports multi-currency. So for example, you would define within your environment, what are the transaction currencies, that we need. So let's say, for example, I received a bill in Australian dollars. Based on either my entity or this dropdown, I can say, okay, what is my reporting currency? What is this going to post into my general ledger? And say, it's going to post in USD. Based off that exchange rate date and the exchange rate type, Intacct will fetch the actual exchange rate. The Intacct daily rate pulls from Moanda, so it's constantly updated. It's not something that folks need to then manage or kind of maintain a table, and as the days go on, continue to update that way as this date changes. So let's say, for example, if I push this back to 12/31/23, right, that rate's going to change. You then don't need to manage all of those individual rates with those days. If it pulls from that daily rate, it's just going to automatically populate. You could have a custom rate if that's something that you needed, right? It gives you the flexibility. But then based on the amount, so for example, if this is 100 Australian dollars, Intacct will do the translation and flip it, right? If you then wanted to see, for example, let's say the inverse and say it's the transactions in USD, but I'm going to post it in Australian dollars because I'm going to choose an Australian entity, right? It'll do the flip, right? So you don't have to worry about doing the math. It's all kept in the bill and tracked. On top of that, so in Intacct, one of the biggest differences is we don't have a segmented chart of accounts. So we'll have a shared, just like our vendor list, a shared chart of accounts, the natural GL number. So we have one payroll taxes GL, we can have one, other expense, other income, right? So you have those individual GL accounts, and then based on dimensions, so you have, for example, projects, you can have an item, you can have a department, you can have, your entities or your locations, you can track all those different data points, and you can also relabel them. But then it's a different view. Instead of having to, keep in mind, I have 4 digits and 2 digits and 3 digits, and I need to enter it that way because then I know the middle 2 digits mean this, the last 3 digits mean that. You have them as separate dropdowns, right? So that it makes it pretty straightforward in terms of managing that. And if we need to set up any rules in the system, we could always set up rules to say, for example, this project should only transact with this department and this location, right? And then all this is, managed in a single login, so that if I do a bill, for example, for entity 100, I can draft it, I can save it, and then I just kind of move on to the next. I don't need to change what I'm doing, log out and log back in. It's all managed in one place.
Okay, so financial reporting and dashboards in Sage 100, it's pretty limited what you can do with the financials. There's no multi-company consolidation options with standard financials. There's no drill down from financial reports to transaction detail, which would be very helpful. It's a request we get a lot in the Sage 100 side. How do we drill down to the detail? We do have Sage Intelligence, which is an external Excel-based tool for better, reporting and consolidations. It works well for many of our clients, but it's not native inside of Sage 100. So, and Andres kind of talked a little bit about dimensions. With Sage 100, we have a main account and then sub accounts. What you're going to see when we kind of get into the financial reports and dashboards is what those dimensions actually do for dashboard reporting, financial reporting. It's kind of mind-blowing once you can drill down into these different dimensions, and you can group these dimensions with different parent-child relationships. And this is really one of the most valuable pieces of Sage Intacct. So Andres, we'll dive into this now, show you some reports and dashboards.
And so if we're going to navigate up to one of these dashboards, and we're actually going to look at, so I have this project-based dashboard. And so dashboards in general, so you can put multiple different kinds of components. This could be somebody's default home screen if you need to, but you can have things like a scorecard, you can have things like reports. We're going to take a look at a couple of different reports, and I'm actually going to pop these out in 2 separate tabs. So we're going to have this revenue trend by dimension, and then we're going to have just this general profit and loss statement. And so when we're looking at these reports, so Intacct supports for, you have your regular, your standard, profit and loss. This is, in this case, it's trailing 12 months. You have your individual GL accounts rolling up into account groups, and so that you can show it all on a report. You can pull it from the dashboard, and anywhere where you have this blue text, you can click into that number. And so this gets into the drill down. And so that number, that's going to give you the underlying GL detail, so that you can see, what, I clicked my revenue for subscriptions amount. I can see it, okay, I have this 3,100. I can click on that. I can see kind of where is that coming from, if it's coming from an underlying journal entry, right? If it's coming from, if there's, some other invoice, or if it's pulling from like a revenue recognition schedule, right? But based on your permissions, you can access all that information. So common questions of when we're reviewing financials and thinking about, well, why is this number different from that number? Why did this change? Why is this 0? You can click and drill down on all of that. And then on the flip side, so if we look at this revenue trend by project, so this is where it gets a little bit different, where instead of reporting on solely just the GL account, we can report on those dimensions, right? So just like how we looked at in that AP bill screen, whether we have department, project, the location/entity, we can group those together. So in this case, we've defined this report. It's built out so that we're just looking at our revenue group. And we're saying, what, in my rows, first, I want to break out my 2 US operating locations. That way I can see, what that actual is. There's still hyperlinks in here, so I can still drill down into that number. So if I have a question as to kind of where that came from, and I want to see, what this $9,000 or $19,000 amount came from, I can see that it came from an invoice, right? You still have all of that, but then we can bring in, for example, service lines, which in this environment is a department. Or if we want to further group things, right, we're bringing in this case, industries, we're grouping projects. We can group projects based on their PM, and you can show all of it. Intacct also supports if we want to have any kind of conditional formatting or color scales. And for example, in this very last column, we have a trend line. Right? So that's all native to the system. And going back to the dashboards, these are also permissionable, right? So if there are certain dashboards that we want to hide visibility on, when this is set up, and this is something that based on, your user level, role assigned, we can say, for example, I don't want everybody to see this, or I'm just going to deny my non-admin users, and then I want to include Tom because I like Tom. So I want to make sure Tom can see this dashboard. So you can do that in your permissions, and then Tom can then access that dashboard. And then these graphs and these performance cards, they can also be drilled into. So for example, if I click on revenue services, I can open that up, and I can see the underlying data behind it, right? And then these performance cards can show a comparison against budget, against the prior year, they're all there. And then when it comes to real-time data, so for example, this demo environment has data through 2019, but let's say, for example, instead of looking at 12/31, if I wanted to push it back and say, you know what, I'm living in June, I want you to show me what that is, I can change that date, I can apply it, all these tiles will update, right? I can then continue pushing these out. If I wanted to print this, I could print the screen or anything like that because I'm in a browser. And then aside from reports like this, so I'm actually going to go over to this year-end close dashboard, we can track additional information. So for example, if there's an approval queue, so whether in this case purchasing transactions or payments. So I have an $83,000 payment for equipment repair, that check's been sitting out there for a little bit. So maybe I need to escalate that to somebody or figure out kind of what's going on there, but I can look at it all from a dashboard. I can also track a checklist. So any items that I need for, my close, whether it be year end, this could also be month end, this could be audit prep, for any kind of deadlines that we may have. And then when it comes to navigation, so similar to the bookmarks, the links from the home screen, the favorites menu, you can put any kind of custom navigations and shortcuts on these dashboards as well. That way it just makes users' life a little bit easier and say, you know what, if I'm going to focus on my year-end close, I can go through here and say, you know what, maybe I need to look at my books, maybe I need to look at a trial balance, and I can just pull those reports pretty easily. So that's on the close piece. When we're looking on just the intercompany, then we also have the inter-entity account mapping. And so to Eric's point in terms of, how we're able to manage all these entities within a single environment, we can also track the due to, due froms for those individual relationships inside of the environment. That way, we don't need to do any manual journal entries to those due to or due from accounts.
Yeah, and what's really cool about those dashboards is when you get into those dimensions, you can drop down into any of those dimensions and just filter the dashboard by a specific dimension or group of dimensions. So that's where it gets very flexible. And then you can take those dashboards and expose them to different users. So if you have a department manager for department 1, they can use a employee user license, which is more of a read-only license, and they can log in and just see their dashboards, once a month or once a week. So it's a great way to get just the information that your people need to use and expose just the right things to them. So with the continuous close and consolidations, we've already touched on, that's lacking in Sage 100, the ability to consolidate. The other thing we just wanted to point out is nothing gets posted in Sage 100 without a journal register update process, as you all know. So you go through a process, you print or preview your journals, save them to paperless office, and then that's when it gets posted to the general ledger. So we just don't have that extra step with Sage Intacct. What we do have that's optional are approvals. So Andres just showed you there was a payment waiting to be approved. So if you want to have, your users enter in AP bills and then you want to have an approver, it just sits in a little approval list view and they can go in and approve them all. And at that point, they would hit the GL. But if not, if you don't have approvals turned on, as soon as you enter the transaction, assuming everything is valid and there's no errors, it's just going to post through to the AP and to the GL. So I'll turn it back over to Andres.
Thanks, Eric. All right. Yep. And so if in Intacct, so we touched a little bit on the IAT mapping. So I actually have bookmarked this journal entry. And so what I'll do to kind of help show the postings, I can duplicate this entry, right? And let's say, for example, if I'm going to post this on, we'll take today's date. I can say, let's say, for example, I'm doing this journal entry, I'm going to impact cash, I'm going to hit revenue services. When I go to post this entry, if I have the relevant permissions, I could also draft it. It can go through an approval process. All I have to do is click post. Then I can navigate back to my journal entries. That's going to be in my general journal. I can then see that this entry posted, right? So there's no batch update process like Eric mentioned. And in this entry, for example, this is actually crossing entities. So going back to that mapping, once that's established, Intacct knows automatically, what that due to or due from needs to be. So that way the debits and credits balance by entity, right? No longer needing any manual manipulation, it just goes through. The same is true when we're going through and posting bills, AR invoices, things like that. For bills and payments, like there's an approval process. Although there's no batch posting, it still won't post without that approval being fully done, right? So if it's still pending approval, your general ledger is not going to be updated, right? So you still have that control. You're not losing that at all. And so then if we look at consolidations, Intacct handles consolidations all within the product. And so you can track different consolidation books. The book that we're going to take a look at is this global book. And so what this is we're essentially grouping our entities to say, okay, this is the different consolidation scenarios that I need. In this case, right, we can put in our descriptions. We can say, okay, what is my reporting currency? So we're going to set it to USD. All right, how are we going to translate, or how are we going to manage the different currencies? So if I have entities that have different base currencies, so let's say one in USD, one in GBP, how am I going to handle that? So for example, in this case, an ending spot rate for balance sheet accounts and a weighted average for income statements, right? We can then choose what entities we're going to consolidate, right? And so that's just a simple pick list. So in this case, it's everything except my E100. And then we can enable the inter-entity auto elimination. So we no longer have to manually post eliminating entries to write off, any intercompany. We also control what dimensions we need. So for consolidated reports, maybe we don't need to report all the way down to the vendor, right? All the way down to the item. Maybe we just need our location and our department, and that's it. We're able to control this, and you can have as many of these consolidation books as you need. We can also bring in individual journals. So if we have adjustment journals, for example, for 606, we have adjustment journals for allocations, and we want to bring that into the individual consolidation, we can bring those in. And then if we have any historical accounts, so let's say we bought a building 20 years ago, and so that's going to use a specific rate up until a certain time, right? We get to control those. That way, those aren't being reevaluated when we're doing new consolidations. And then finally, when we look at eliminating accounts, so this is pulling straight from that IET mapping, it's going to pull in all the due to, do froms. But then if we have any other accounts that we need to add, let's say, an intercompany consulting and, revenue and expense line, right? We can bring those in so that we can make sure that those are being eliminated when we run the consolidation. And then when it comes to running the consolidation, it's as easy as just going here to run consolidation, right? So we go to one menu, we can say, you know what, I want to reconsolidate in this case because I have data through 2019, I'm going to reconsolidate November, right? All I have to do is hit consolidate. I could consolidate with options if I wanted to look at, updating things, if I want to redo, but that's just going to run offline. It will ask you for your email address. So for example, this is pulling mine for my user record. I'll hit OK, and it's going to go ahead and run. And so once that's done, Intacct will actually give you, a little email notification like this, essentially saying it's been done, it's for this time period, it's for these entities, and then you're done, right? If you wanted to look at the history, the consolidation history is all there, right? So you can easily navigate to that. You can see, when was the last time that we consolidated? When did we first do it? Is it in process? It's all there. And once that consolidation runs, you can then go back to a dashboard. And for example, I have this consolidated dashboard where then I can run, consolidated balance sheet. All this is in USD, right? You can then run these kind of reports. These are then updated, right? And then you can push them out or, do whatever else you need to do.
Okay, moving on to bank reconciliation. Where do I begin with the Sage 100 bank reconciliation? Let's just say there are a couple of issues. One is the GL account does not drive the bank reconciliation, the bank code does. And so that makes the system a bit disjointed. I would say it increases the possibility for error. The most common error would be just hitting that GL account directly that reflects the bank account, but it never makes it to the bank rec module because you didn't do a special transaction journal entry. So unfortunately, we have, quite a few clients that have just never adopted the bank rec module in Sage 100 because it's a little bit too clunky. Sage Intacct's cash management module is much more user-friendly, has some great matching rules, and Andres will jump in and show you that.
And so, like Eric mentioned, so in Intacct, so we go to cash management. This is where we track all the individual checking, savings accounts, credit cards, and so on. We're going to look at, this 100. And so when we set up the checking account, it's tied to a specific location / entity, and it's tied to a specific GL account. It does not allow you to share, right? So then anything that goes to that GL account will show up on the bank rack. It doesn't matter if it's a journal entry. It doesn't matter if it's a cash management transaction like a fund transfer or bank interest, things like that, or if it's payments going in or out. It will, as long as it's hitting that GL account, it will show up on the bank rack. On top of that, Intacct also has the banking cloud. And so the banking cloud, this is how, depending on your financial institution, we can try to connect. So for example, I'm going to click on Chase. We can then sign into online banking. Intacct uses Plaid as a connector. So that way you can then log into your bank. It'll then pull the bank details into Intacct, right? The reason why we would do that is to help with reconciling, right? And so for example, if we go back to this details tab, we can then assign to each checking account, and these checking accounts can share a rule set. It doesn't have to be a 1-by-1. So it just depends on what we're doing here. But in these rule sets, based off those bank transactions, we can do two main different kinds of rules. We can do a matching rule. So for example, if I open up this simple rule based on a certain set of criteria, so if we filter this down and we say, you know what, I want you to look at the bank transactions that are coming in. I want you to look at the posting date. I want you to look at an amount, and I want you to look at the document number, removing any leading zeros. If all those equal these individual fields on the Intacct side, match the transaction, right? So I find that most useful for things like checks. As checks are going through and clearing through the account, they pull in through the bank feed, Intacct's matching those up. So that way, when we need to go in for a bank rec, we can focus on the other items that may not have matched because let's say that there is no document number because it's an ACH or things like that. But then there are other rules. So that's matching. There is also creation rules. So in this case, I have 3. We have a bank fee, interest payment, and a transfer. We're going to look at the transfer. These creation rules, similar to the matching rules, we can then filter the data set by saying, okay, look at the bank transactions. If the description contains transfer, right, all in caps, and the posting date is greater than 10/31/2023, then I want you to do this, right? And so in this case, we've defined it to, I want you to create a journal entry. I want you to follow this template. And if we click into that template, we'll see we specify the offset. So in this case, it's going to be a transfer from 100 to 200, the 2 different checking accounts, right? And then I get to choose my dimensions as well. So I'm going to flag, I'm going to hit this department, I'm going to hit this location, and then this is going to be my memo. I can then specify also the posting state. So this is going to draft all of these journal entries for me. It's not going to automatically post them because I don't want them to. I want somebody to take a look at them before. I want somebody to actually go in and hit post. It could be set to post. And then I specify what journal those are going to. So that way I can organize my journal entries to make it a little bit easier to review. But with those 2 main rules, that all rolls up into the rule set that then we can assign to this account. And so then when we go to reconcile, and so I'm going to choose same account, this is going to be 131, just enter an amount. You can also import the bank transaction. So if your financial institution doesn't connect for whatever reason, there is an import template so you can still load those and those rules will fire. But then once we go and hit continue and I actually open up the bank rec, I can see, some things have matched, some things have reconciled. I can see the amount that I have remaining to reconcile. I can see my book balance. I can also, on the previous screen, attach the bank statement if I want to. That way I can have everything together. And then I have my bank transactions. So these are the unmatched transactions. So these didn't go through the matching because I don't have document number 1008 on the Intacct side, or the date and the amount didn't match as well. But then if I also expand this out to look at all the transactions on the Intacct side, I can see that no matter where these are coming from, whether it be a journal entry, whether it be a receipt, whether it be a payment, whether it be an advance, they all flow through to the bank rec, right? So that way they're all in one place. It's kind of easy to manage them. I don't need to then do a manual reconciliation in Excel. I can refresh the feed at any point, right? So if I have an open bank rec that I'm just working on throughout the month, I can kind of keep it going. I can make edits, I can save, and then ultimately I can reconcile once this amount to reconcile is 0. Until that amount hits 0, the system just won't let you reconcile. But then once that's all done, Intacct does also then store the reconciliation histories. And so if we needed to go back and say, you know what, I wanted to look at my last bank rec. When's the last time that I did it? I don't need to go to a network file. I don't need to make sure that it's, or pull it out of a binder. It's here. I can see the last one was 11:30. I can pull the reconciliation report, download it CSV, Excel, or PDF. So for example, once, we get to audit season and we need to bring these out, I can show those. And this is going to show the full reconciliation report, right? It'll show what my statement ending balance was, if I have any outstanding checks, deposits in transit, and the details all there. Same is true for outstanding items. If I just want to show outstanding items, I don't want to show the full bank rec. And then if I needed to reopen that rec, reasons for reopening could be everything matched to the bank, but then there's additional GL activity that got booked. And so I want to update that report. I can reopen and then just re-reconcile and I'm all set. I can reopen multiple periods if I needed to. Right, you have the flexibility, and that is a separate permission so that not everybody, has access to do that.
Okay, and then system upgrades. For those of you that have been on Sage 100 for a while, you understand that the process is to install the new version, either on your existing server or possibly on a new server, migrate the data, convert the data. A lot of our clients will go through a test pilot phase first to test everything before then again doing a final migration, converting the data again, and going live. And that can obviously be a time-consuming and expensive process to go through those upgrades. Sage is releasing those. They do release upgrades annually with some new features. On the Intacct side, it just happens automatically, we like to say, or automatically. It's just happening behind the scenes. Happens every quarter. They just released 2024 release 1 for the first quarter, and there's no services involved to upgrade. At DSD, we like to review the new features with each release and send out a little email to our Intacct client base and just say, hey, here's what we like with the new release. Here's what you should take a look at. So, anything to add on that, Andres?
Yep. Yeah, and so all that you could also access directly within the product. And so on the default home screen, it's always going to let you know, hey, release 1 is here. Here are some kind of easy tidbits. But if you want to, you can go ahead and read the release notes. And then Intacct does a really good job of sending out these updated release notes. They're very detailed. They're broken out by module. So that way, if there's things that we want to focus on, whether it be, financials, whether it be regional updates, you can. They also do these little quick videos. So, it's a 10-minute video to give you the highlights. You don't have to sit there for 30, 40 minutes. And then you also have the release calendar. So that way, at any time when these releases are supposed to take place, right? So R1 was, in mid-February, next one's going to be in mid-May. And then ultimately, outside of the main 4 quarterly releases, there are also smaller releases that happen in between. And so those, maybe for just glitches, maybe for certain products and not, let's say the projects module and not AP as well, things like that. But then you could always find those in the release notes.
Okay, in the future with Sage Intacct, we're gonna, 3 of us on this call, Jennifer, myself, Sean, and Kimberly, we're all at the Sage Transform conference a couple weeks ago in Las Vegas, and the future is very bright. So when we talk about these quarterly releases, it's not like fixing a little bug here or there. It's like adding AP automation, or right now their big thing is working on Sage Copilot, which is think of it, like a personal AI assistant. You could say, hey, you're inside of Intacct. There's a little kind of chat area for Sage Copilot, and you say, give me the current AR balance for company XYZ. You just type that in and it gives you the balance. So that's what Sage Copilot's going to look like. That's a very simple example. It can do a lot more. So the next conference for Sage, and we believe this is going to be kind of a multi-product conference with Sage 100, Sage Intacct, Sage 300, but it's scheduled for the fall of 2024 in Georgia, Atlanta. And then 2024 release 1 is already out, like we just showed you. So a lot of exciting things happening with Sage Intacct. We were able to sit on a lot of sessions about what's coming, and we're pretty excited about the investment and the direction that they're going. Okay, we're going to turn it over to Sean to talk about some customer success stories.
Thanks, Eric. And I think we always feel like these customer success stories are really powerful, especially to us, because it's one thing for us to tell you that Sage Intacct is great and that there's some pretty significant improvements versus Sage 100. It's something else entirely when we're talking about companies that we've helped to migrate. And we've got a lot of different tools that we can help to aid with that migration, has been alluded to elsewhere. One of the ones that we wanted to highlight was ProPark Mobility. They have over 700 different locations, a couple hundred different entities, and they were able to make the switch from Sage 100 to Intacct really smoothly. Some of the results that they've seen as a product of that switch were they were able to shorten their time for monthly consolidated financial reports for all 700 locations and a couple hundred different entities by 10 to 12 hours, and it's a pretty significant time saving across their team. They're also saving 20 hours a month of senior staff time assembling work papers. And really, they were able to leverage those dimensions that Andres showed you to deliver some deep insight into every different operational area, really get some key insights that we're able to leverage in order to make better reporting every month. And per their CFO, the consolidated financials are available instantly as a standard report option. They just have to choose what they want from that menu. It's completely eliminated 10 to 12 hour tasks for their team each month. So we're really proud of what we were able to achieve there with ProPark. Another one that we wanted to highlight is the Consumer Bankers Association. This is a nonprofit association that serves as a trade association. They put on different events and webinars and publications for their industry. They made the switch from Sage 100 Intacct. They were able to get rid of some of their 50+ page reports just by using that dimensions feature. And that's allowed them to save 30% of their time. Across a small team, that's a pretty significant amount of time that they are able to get back and put more into analysis. And they were able to use some of the workflows that Andres showed you to make for a more efficient, straightforward process all the way across the board. And they really also spoke highly of the migration process with those tools that we have and our team's expertise. They said that migration was well planned, thorough, and efficient. Consultants knew what they were doing, and it's overall an excellent experience for them. We'd love to talk to you a little bit more about what that experience could be like for you. One last one that we wanted to highlight was Stony Creek Hospitality, and they do have a unique portfolio of hotels that combine a bunch of different amenities with genuine hospitality, and they had a pretty complicated business model. And when they made the switch from Sage 100 Intacct, they were able to gain some efficiencies with their operations team. They now have real-time access into metrics that used to take a month to assemble. And it's nice for them because they're no longer having to field a lot of questions from that operations team in terms of what's behind those metrics. That operations team is able to go in and get the answers for themselves. And I know anybody that's worked in finance and had to answer a lot of questions from different department heads would appreciate the fact that these people can go and find these things for themselves. They got a 60% efficiency gain with that. And really what that enabled them was to have some room to grow. No longer they have every member of their finance team being leveraged to the hilt and having to spend all this time. They had a bunch of time free up for them, saving hours of work with the vendor payments options with Sage Intacct. Overall, they felt like DSD and Sage Intacct allowed them to do more with less, and they're confident in the ability to scale this business with the staff that they have. They haven't had to add or subtract headcount. They're just able to utilize their staff more effectively. So we really are proud of some of the efficiencies that they've been able to gain and these success stories as a whole, because we feel like it validates the things that we're telling you on a webinar like this and the conversations that we're having with our clients that are looking at switching from 100 to Intacct. So I think at this time, we had wanted to field any questions that anybody might have. Kimberly, were you able to, did we have any come through we wanted to talk about?
So there has been a few. I will say, I know we're running pretty short on time as well. So one question asked about the capabilities for inventory. So is there much around that we could maybe touch on, or should this be more of a
Yeah, I can
follow-up?
tackle that. I mean, Sage is working on a product called Sage Distribution Manufacturing Operations. It's intended to be kind of the distribution and manufacturing portion of Intacct. It is with an integration, so it can integrate to other products as well. And DSD is certified in that, and we'll keep you posted as that continues to develop. They're putting a lot of investment into that. They're basically putting out monthly releases for that product. And if you have more information, please reach out to us and we can get deeper.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that a little bit, Eric, I know we're running short on time, but really, we want to have a further conversation about how you're using inventory, how you need that information to move through your system, because there's a couple different ways we can handle it. SDMO, or Sage Distribution and Manufacturing Operations, like Eric was talking about, is absolutely one, but there are other options within Sage Intacct that we can use to address that as well.
Kimberly, anything else?
Yep, perfect. I think we're right up to the top of the hour, so in respect to everyone's time, we'll go ahead and just wrap. So thank you to our presenters, and thank you to our attendees for joining us. We will be sending a copy of this recording to you, so if you want to relive the magic here or send it to any of your colleagues, you will have that in the next 24 hours. And thank you for your questions. If anything does also come to mind, please feel free to reach out, and we'll be following up to get your thoughts on everything you saw today. So we appreciate your time, everyone. Thank you again for joining us.